In 1949, my father was 13 years old. He was abandoned on a pier in China as the nationalists, the KMT, fled to Taiwan. No money, no ticket, no family by his side. And yet, he survived. This is the story of that escape. And white people like my father became some of the fiercest anti-communists you'd ever meet. For context, that year, the Republic of China, the same ROC that Taiwan is today, lost the civil war to the Chinese Communist Party. In October, the CCP founded the People's Republic of China, PRC. Between 1 and 2 million people followed the ROC across the strait to Taiwan, among them, my father. And before I tell you more, quick introduction. Hi, I'm Seriously, Taiwan Matters. I'm Taiwanese American, now living in Europe. These are my guinea pigs. They never let a good carrot escape their paws. Some of you have asked me to talk more about history. It's a big subject, so I'll make it into a series. And I thought I'd start by cracking the egg open at the most dramatic point, 1949, when the ROC moved to Taiwan. It's also the luckiest break in my family history. For most of the first half of the 20th century, China was at war, first between warlords after the fall of the Qing dynasty and the founding of the ROC in 1912, then civil war between the KMT and the CCP. That war paused only briefly in 1937, when both sides faced a bigger threat, Japan's full-scale invasion. From 1937 to 1945, the ROC fought Japan in the 8-year War of Resistance. The KMT bore the brunt of the battles and casualties. Millions of soldiers and civilians died in those campaigns. Historians like Rainer Mitter and Hans van der Ven point out that the major battles, Shanghai, Nanjing, Wuhan, were fought by the KMT. The CCP, meanwhile, stayed mostly in the countryside. As Art Honor Wested shows, they fought selectively with guerrilla tactics and avoided large battles, conserving strength, expanding their rural base, and preparing to resume the civil war later. So, while the KMT fought Japan head-on, the CCP built power in the shadows, polishing their legend with propaganda. As Jonathan Fenby points out, they even claimed credit for victories they never fought, and then rewrote the history books to make people believe it. Oh wait, Chinese communists still do that today. Always the good guys in their own fantasy. Once Japan was defeated, the CCP turned its guns back on the KMT, and the civil war resumed. The northern countryside where my father lived suffered heavily, occupied by the Japanese since the late 30s, and when they withdrew in 1945, new threats quickly filled the vacuum. My father remembered bandits sweeping through villages, looting and burning. As villagers sounded alarm, his cousin would carry him up the mountain to hide. Often they were forced to separate from others because my father's crying could potentially expose their location. Over time, those bandits became organized terrors, scheduling weekly punishment of some villager. Every family had to send someone to participate in the stoning or risk being next. My grandmother even sent herself to these stonings, sparing others in the family from the trauma. My father recalled that the bandits called themselves communists. History books clarified a child's memory. There were Chinese communist squads who quickly moved in to seize any regions abandoned by Japan before the ROC could re-establish control. In the countryside, they launched land reforms, dragging landlords into public squares for struggle sessions, humiliated, beaten, sometimes stoned to death. According to historian Frank Decatur, up to 2 million people were killed during land distribution from 1947 to 1952, often ordinary farmers forced into violence. Historians sometimes say that the CCP captured the hearts of the peasants. From my father's perspective, villagers supported the CCP not out of ideology, but because there was no turning back. With blood on their hands, survival meant loyalty. My grandmother was a widow with 2 kids, my father at 11, my aunt at 17. She struggled to grow crops with hired hands on the family plots in snowy mountains to pay the heavy taxes levied by the Japanese, often owing more than they earned. Hardly the capitalist elite that the CCP wanted people to imagine. But to the Chinese communists, that still made her an evil landlord. So her turn eventually came to face a mob stoning. Then just in time, someone from the next village tipped her off. She had just a few days to act. She wanted to save her children, but it had to be done in absolute secrecy. My aunt said my grandmother begged her to marry a KMT soldier so that she could leave with the KMT and take her little brother with her. She said an agent arranged this desperate matchmaking. My aunt never met her husband before they tied the knot. He was on the front lines. In fact, my father at age 11 wasn't told why they had to go to a nearby city in a hurry, and just remember being annoyed that his mother cried an entire ride in the horse carriage. When they arrived, they were hurried to leave with someone without their mother, to join the KMT camp, as it turned out. My father turned to look for his mother and saw her collapse to the ground. That was the last time they ever saw her. If this was a movie, this scene might have been cut for being melodramatic. Except this was a real-life tearjerker. Somehow my grandmother survived, but we'll only learn a few sketchy details decades later. That story is for another time. From 1947 to 1949, my father's childhood was measured by retreat. My aunt recounted packing up camp after camp, always heading further south. Probably like Groundhog Day, another camp, only warmer and farther from home each time. Bill Murray had it easy. Historians describe about 1,000 battles between 1945 and 1949. The defining ones were the three Great Campaigns, Liaoshen, Huaihai, Pingjin. They destroyed the KMT main forces north of the Yangtze River, also known as the Long River, the natural barrier running from the Tibet's highlands to Shanghai. This opened the road for the communists to capture Nanjing and Shanghai in the spring of 1949, the final straw for the nationalist KMT. By early 1949, ships had already begun carrying troops and civilians to Taiwan, but the real flood of escape came after the communists captured Nanjing in April and Shanghai in May. Desperate evacuations actually continued into early 1950 until the last ports were lost. Historians describe chaotic and tragic scenes. Every pier was overcrowded, families begging to board, soldiers trying to hold order as ships filled beyond capacity. My father remembered being left off the passenger list. My aunt boarded a ship for dependents of her husband's platoon and departed. By then, he was 13, left standing on the pier, penniless, in total chaos. We never heard how he felt. What he remembered was an announcement over the loudspeaker. An officer ordered someone to rush him on board, recognizing him as my soldier uncle's dependent, just moments before the ship pulled away. That man saved my father's life and remained in his life in Taiwan. And yeah, I exist because one officer had good eyesight. But arriving in Taiwan didn't mean the struggle was over. Taiwan itself had about 6 million people at the time, and suddenly between 1 and 2 million more poured in. There wasn't enough housing. My aunt lived in crowded dorms for soldiers' wives. My father may have been living on the street. Police picked him up as homeless without papers. At the time, anyone without papers was considered a possible communist spy. He was locked up in a shelter for months, waiting for his identity to be verified. Those who failed could be sent back to China, jailed, or worse. There he bonded with strangers, an architect, a teacher, who became like father figures to him, and a boy his age who later opened a bike shop. Those bonds helped him survive, but the fear of the communists never left him. My father never became a KMT member, even at the cost of his career. That's complicated and a story for another time. But his fear and distrust of the Chinese communists was crystal clear. He wasn't surprised by the Cultural Revolution, or decades later, the Tiananmen Square massacre. He had seen CCP's ruthlessness firsthand. And if you look at what's happened to Tibet, the Uyghurs, and Hong Kong, he'd still be right. So if I sing anti-communist, it's not just ideology. It's memory passed down by survivors. It makes me grateful to have been born in Taiwan because of my father's escape, and proud that instead of turning trauma into tyranny like China did, Taiwan turned trauma into democracy. Please subscribe and check out our other videos.